farm life. We are live. Oh my goodness. That took a second because farm life. We are live with 710 Daily Sesh. Here we grow Tuesdays. Danyka here. And we are so grateful to have Timothy Harvey with Lighthouse Genomics. And Timothy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me here live on Here We Grow. It is wonderful, and I feel like I'm visiting you in your home office, which is somewhere that I've been lucky enough to be before. It was shortly after a wonderful cannabis convention. Perhaps we can talk about that a bit later. And it was a highlight of the summer, I think, of 2019. So I visited your farm, and one of the things we did it was collect some samples in your field of hemp, and we did that so that I could bring the samples back to BC, extract the DNA, and send them off to the lab. My company is Lighthouse Genomics, and what we do is we gene sequence and genotype cannabis, and we're starting to get into other organisms. So. Essentially, we look for the story that's contained inside every cannabis plant, the story of its ancestry, its functional genes, its relationship with other plants in the cannabis population. And there's a lot, depending on the reasons for the investigation, there's a lot of information that we can draw out of a plant's DNA. So we work with farmers and producers and breeders and growers, and help to, in some cases, to support their breeding of new, better cannabis varieties. In other cases, we authenticate their cannabis varieties for the marketplace, so that consumers can have confidence that what they're buying is, in fact, what's on the label. And then in some cases, we support researchers in their quest to link traits to the genetic basis in cannabis DNA. So there's a lot of different fields of activity, but essentially our business is modeled around genetic analysis of cannabis.
Oh my gosh, and that's so incredible. And I will say, I will brag about the fact that our hemp field in Ontario was the first to have your expertise come on and start gene mapping with the genetic finola, which was what we planted at that season. So we are really still so excited to see what that looks like moving forward. My question though, what was the turning point where you said, hey, we need the authentication. We need to know what the origin is, or what the, inception, for lack of a better word. Where did that, kind of Steve Jobs in the basement garage moment happen for you?
Well, I did work in sort of cannabis R&D and in breeding for a few years, in the sort of from about 2008-9 until about 2015 or 16, and one of I always felt limited without the tools of genomics, and I was well aware that the professional corporate breeders in the field were using these advanced scientific tools, and whereas I was using my nose and my eyes and my instincts to for the selection pipeline of selecting which plants to keep, that the so-called pheno hunting that we do when we plant a bunch of seeds, and you keep the best and you breed with those for the next generation. And there came a point that I learned about the technologies available, and that they were becoming more and more accessible in terms of price, but I didn't have the expertise around me to make any use of them, and I didn't. There weren't companies in Canada, at least, offering the sort of results I was looking for. So, in speaking to geneticists, local geneticists, we determined that if it wasn't out there, we could create it. So that's the in a sense, it was a slow progression of just breeding for years and just realizing that wouldn't it be great if these tools existed and if I could access them and if I could, and if I could also offer them to other people in my position. But then as we started moving in that direction, it quickly became apparent that there was almost more pressing, urgent need in the industry because essentially, we had inherited, we as in the present day and the young legalizing cannabis industry had inherited a lot of traditions from the prohibition era, which worked really well in the prohibition era because if nobody was really staking their claim, so to speak. There is still a subculture of breeders, and people know that there are subcool strains, and there are BC Bud Depot strains, and there are Seedsman strains, but really those sorts of businesses were not so concerned about locking down IP, and this essentially by the time those varieties got to the marketplace, there was a lot of folklore attached to varieties, to strains that were being marketed, and those.
Okay, so I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but for those of us who don't know about IP and how that applies to agriculture and strains, how would you explain that to somebody who is, like you mentioned, kind of honing in on that and not knowing what that looks like?
Yeah, so we've entered an era where really these varieties, these new optimized varieties, are very valuable, and so now when people are developing these high performing varieties, or they're finding their one cut, they want to be able to license it out into the industry. And it's very important to have the right legal mechanisms in place. So essentially, a breeder can now send in their variety for testing to Lighthouse, receive a certificate of analysis. They could actually send it. The best way to do it is to send it through our partners at Purity IQ and go through the cannabis authenticity and purity standard. And Lighthouse runs the genomics for that. Receive this certificate of analysis, which characterizes, it contains genetic metrics. It's kind of like a genetic portrait, a passport, if you will, for that organism, for that group of clones, anything that shares, any plant that shares the genome. So once that is registered, now it can be tested at any point. Cannabis can be bought off the shelf, tested, and we can confirm whether it matches that certified identity or whether it's different. So when there are, if a breeder is in a position, or a company is in a position to start licensing out their varieties, they want their agreements to be enforceable. They don't want, if they've got an agreement that a company can produce their variety, they don't want that company to then actually breed with it potentially or sell it, like, just depending what the agreement is. So now with these certificates of genetic identity, it's possible to have these enforceable licensing agreements, and that allows breeders to really stake their claim to their varieties and to create business models around licensing those throughout the industry. And of course, there is now this opportunity for companies, as they're becoming licensed, to declare their genetics. So there's this opportunity now to move genetics into the industry and access those revenues. And it's an interesting new market. There have been licensing agreements and export agreements for 7 figures. So it's big business, and a lot of the hard work of the breeders of the past decades has been inherited by the current regulated industry for nothing. And it's it's high time that people behind these genetic resources that are so valuable are rewarded for their hard work. So we provide the documentation to enable people to craft agreements around their varieties.
And that is so that is actually paramount in that, is that I think you are, dare I say, empowering the consumer to be more knowledgeable about what it is that they are consuming. And that comes from, I say it farm to table because I'm biased as a farmer, but even still from, plant to what the consumer is taking, and being extremely aware and having accountability is the biggest takeaway that I'm taking from that. Accountability, what are you growing and what are you then producing?
Exactly. Now, I don't know if I can have a moment before our 7:10 sesh. You know, I'd like to pick up on that because I was speaking more about some of
Oh
the
my
business.
God, no, we have to
Oh,
pause. Kim will kill us. We
okay.
have to pause.
7:10 sesh. Okay, let's pick this up though, because there's a huge part about protecting the consumers and getting people what they're looking
Yes,
for.
no, you do it, and everybody else can sesh and listen to Timothy because he is the smartest person that I know. Kim, I did not forget. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that I have the best guests that have so much knowledgeable information to share. Happy 710, happy 420, everybody. Tim, pretty please continue. This is what we need to know, and this is how the industry is moving forward.
Sure. So there is a lot of concern when medical patients and when consumers who you know, they find a strain, they find a product that works for them. There's a lot of concern about not being able to repeat that experience and obtain the same quality and, in fact, the same genetic identity of flower product time after time. And there are cases where we and our colleagues have, or others in the industry of genetic analysis, have tested cannabis from batches. And then a few batches later, conducted another test and found that there's a different genetic identity in the package. So that is something that may be done unintentionally. I mean, there's a lot of ways that this could happen, but our so we see the need, and there is a need for authentication of cannabis products so that the consumer knows what they're getting every time, and they can trust, hey, if they see this certification on a cannabis package, and it's the CAPS certification, the Cannabis Authenticity and Purity Standard, will have an insignia on cannabis packages, and that can guarantee that whatever you're buying with that certification is going to be the same time after time after time. Not only the same genetic identity, but a very uniform biochemical profile. Because there's two types of testing that go into this. There's genotyping, so you know you're getting the same clone group every time. And there's NMR, which is nuclear magnetic resonance, which actually forms a very detailed spectrograph of the.
Okay, well, I have to stop you there because for our less scientific, including myself, you have to break that down.
Okay, so break it down. Yeah, pretty. I mean, again, my life revolves around cannabis genomics at this time, but essentially these samples are split. So you send. You know, a company, a producer, sends in their cannabis to the lab, High North Labs in Ontario, and High North extracts the DNA on one hand and also runs this other chemical process. So they send the DNA to Lighthouse. We send back the results. The NMR profile, this signature of all the biochemicals, is then merged in a sense with the genetic ID we produce. And so the long story short is, for the first time in history, there's this really definitive characterized product profile, which can then be scanned and verified time after time as products move through the supply chain. And there's absolute scientific certainty that the end consumer is going to have the same product between batches and time after time. And essentially, it removes the confusion and the question around what is a strain. What is Purple Kush? What is Pink Kush? What is Blue Dream? I mean, amazingly, Pink Kush is one of the most uniform strains there is. We tested 9 different Pink Kushes. We actually ordered them off the BC Cannabis Store, tested them all, and 8 of the 9 matched. They were the same clone. So this is grown in Ontario, grown in BC. The clones were the same, but we've tested other varieties and they've been distinct. So next week, actually, we're going to be releasing some results of Blue Dream, and we're really interested to see, because Pink Kush is from BC. Pink Kush is from actually Vancouver Island, close to where I am. And so it's understandable that one amazing cut would have made it all over Canada, because it was distributed around. It was grown by so many growers. It was such a great strain. Now, Blue Dream is from California. So the question is it also the same cut grown by all these different producers? So is one Blue Dream the same as the other Blue Dream? Or is it the name that's just being applied to maybe close relatives, maybe more distant relatives? But at the end of the day, when a product is certified, then you know that, hey, if I'm buying, Broken Coast Blue Dream, or whatever company it may be, and you go back, or Good Buds here from Salt Spring, and you buy that time after time, you know that if it's certified, you'll be getting the same experience. And I think that's hugely important, because people love their cannabis. You love your cannabis. I love my cannabis. If you're not, when you find something you love, you want to be able to access that time after time. I'm not hearing you. The sound. I think you're on mute. I can't hear you. No. Okay, we've lost Danyka. I can lip read. Do you want to try reconnecting? Well, it says here that everybody can see and hear me. Yeah, I'm on. Danyka is testing me, or texting me.
Stay on the line while your call is completed. Long distance charges may apply.
Hey peeps, how's it going? Hey, how are ya?
How did I get in here?
I hope you can hear me. I think you might have muted yourself.
Oh, I can hear you.
Lighthouse Genome. Can everybody see me?
Audio.
So 420. Oh, Danyka's coming back in, it looks like. There she is. Can we hear you, Danyka?
We're back.
Can you hear?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
There we go.
I hear you.
Bye, peeps. Just wanted to make sure that we got set up. Happy 420. Letting our viewers know. Okay.
So good to us.
Take care.
I love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, we're back.
Great. How did that work out? Like that was interesting.
I genuinely, I'm not going to lie, I'm not sure. I have a really good executive production team behind me, apparently, because I got kicked off. I was not exactly sure. We're still live, so
it's great to be back. Yeah, where were we? I think we were going to talk about that great festival in Northern Ontario where we met, Muskoka.
Yes, Circle of Growth.
Yes, Circle of Growth. So Kevin and Amy Ray.
Oh my gosh, the most amazing people. If you haven't met them, then you're sleeping.
Yes, yes, they are wonderful event organizers, hosts. They hosted a huge slew of people at their homestead there.
We did, and that's where we met Reverend Kelly, who is now being I have really delicious menus, and I call them menus, but they're really calendars, but they're sweet, sweet men of cannabis that she had put together. We met each other there. Ellen had come in from Boston, which was amazing.
Yes.
And yes, I'm really excited for what Circle of Growth is up to next year.
I am. And I did hear from Kevin that he was going to organize, they were going to organize another round, but then of course COVID hit. So it didn't happen last year. Maybe it'll, it's tough to say whether this coming season will have much in the way of events, right? We just don't know. But it's certainly at some point they'll get back on back into the process. And I mean, it was a great event because it really felt like this authentic community. And it was just such a pleasure to connect with the audiences there, and great to hear you and Ellen speak about hemp with so much passion. Yeah.
It was, and like you said, Amy and Kevin put together such a close knitted, authentic grassroots. But when I say grassroots, and I do want to touch on this because I've been thinking about this with pandemic and everything happening, I do see a huge synergy between grassroots and conglomerate corporate, because we're all in the same boat and now we're all paddling, especially in the cannabis industry. So what I loved about Circle of Growth and their event is that they brought huge hitters with grassroots and just bringing all of that together. So I am so excited to see what they do. Amy and Kevin, I miss you.
Yes. And I'd love to hear the story of whatever happened to Kevin's masterpiece monolith. It must have been about 7 feet tall, and it was a giant stone cannabis leaf that he carved.
Well, and there was also the chair that he carved. And my words are slipping me because
yes. So Kevin he's a master mason, right? And he carved this lawn chair out of stone, whatever that beautiful blue stone is from the Muskoka region. And it was actually the most comfortable chair. It was perfectly fit to the curvature of one's spine.
Really?
Yeah, which was amazing, but it wouldn't be quite so cozy in the middle of winter, I suppose, or if it was chilly. But then in the middle of the summer, it was divine.
Anyway, if you have the right sleeping bag, that being said,
yeah.
They're still carrying on Circle of Growth, so everybody stay tuned because big amazing things are happening for that. And it was really incredible to hear you initially talk about gene mapping and what that looks like. And so what are your next steps?
Well, there's a lot going on right now. We are, supporting some companies in their research. There will be a paper published in the next few weeks, which will, for anyone inclined to read scientific journal articles to do with cannabis, this is going to be mind blowing, because it's going to announce the discovery of the first gene conferring resistance to a very, very important disease that faces everybody who's grown cannabis. I can't say what it is, because I want to let the authors of the report make the announcement. But what we've worked with some researchers in the discovery of the genetic sequences behind this resistance to a disease. So that's a major discovery, and it actually it's a real demonstration of the value of our core technology, which is this genotyping chip. It measures 40,000 points in the cannabis plant DNA. So we designed this chip, and it's kind of like what 23andMe uses to see genotype humans. There's certain what's called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms, essentially very.
Sweet Tim, you're speaking to us.
Okay, so variant positions in the genome. So positions in the genome that, depending if you've got one color hair or one color eyes, might be different. That's essentially there's structural variants and there's nucleotide variants. There are two different types of genetic variation, and we have a chip that detects the nucleotide variation.
And that's also prominent in the cannabis plant. And
very prominent in the cannabis plant. Although you asked about future directions, our future direction is that we're getting into the structural variation, because the cannabis, it doesn't just evolve by having these nucleotides change from sort of A to G or C to T. It actually as cannabis evolves, new copies, for example, of genes are made, and the whole genome gets bigger, or sections are deleted and they disappear, or kind of new whole sections just evolve and glom onto the genome. So the shape and structure of the genome itself changes. Chromosomes grow longer or shorter. So that yes.
Hold on, really quick question.
Yeah.
When that shape is changing within, what is cause? Is that based on soil? Is that based on like ecological systems? I mean, like I said, that's Chinese to me. I know soil, and I know magnesium, and I know what I need in my sweet soil. But when we're talking about actual shifting of gene mapping and DNA, what are the factors?
Well, the environment's always changing, and the genome is always evolving and recombining. And as it recombines, there are these sort of accidents of fate that cause the structure of the genome to change in some places. Certainly, I guess to back up a bit, there are 11 chromosomes in cannabis, and one copy of each chromosome is sort of donated from each parent. And they kind of move up against each other, and there is recombination. So that there's random recombination.
It's incestual.
Yeah. I mean, the point is that we're always looking at a cannabis's here's another big word, heterozygosity.
Tell us more about that one.
Versus genetic stability, which is homozygosity. So if so in humans, for example, if speaking of myself, blue eyes, that means that I am homozygous for blue eyes, for whatever gene or genetic variants underlie that. I needed to inherit the same copy from each parent. So if you have a cannabis plant that's been back crossed, say, into the parent, maybe it was crossed out, and then you've taken the offspring, back crossed into the parent, back crossed it into the parent again, and back crossed again for multiple generations, what you're getting is more and more homozygous or matching inheritances into the offspring. So you'll get these SNPs that are the same from each parent. And in this case, simply because, so what you get is a plant that has more traits that are guaranteed to be passed on to its offspring. So it becomes true breeding. And whereas if you take two plants that are completely different, you take a sativa from, Morocco, and you take a heavy indica from Nepal, and you cross them, you're going to get a lot of genetic mixing. You're going to get a completely different variants from each parent. And what you've got, though, so what you've got in the offspring is a plant with an incredibly high degree of internal diversity. So it will not breed true. When you use it in breeding, it's going to be a matter of chance, the range of characteristics that its offspring has, but it's going to have internally a lot of the genetic tools to make it more resilient against disease and more resilient against a greater range of climate conditions and a greater range of soils. So it'll have the genetic tools to form these epigenetic responses, which are sort of the expression of genes to a vast range of conditions. And so what you'll get is a plant that does maybe is more vigorous and more productive. And whereas with these highly inbred varieties, they breed true, but they may need to be grown in a very precise way to be really productive. And growers have found that. They found that certain varieties are really difficult to grow. They've got the, you can go to a seed site and get a difficulty rating sometimes on what you're buying, because oftentimes when we genotype those, we'll see that they've got really high stability or homozygosity, meaning they've inherited the same trait from both parents, and so they need to be grown in a very specific way to perform really well. So these are
the word. I will say it one more time for the gene.
Homozygosity. So
homozygosity. So two parents doing not the good stuff.
That's right. Donating the same copy of each gene. So that's that's one of the one of the characteristics that one of the first things we look at in a plant when we test it is its level of homozygosity, just to understand how much sort of natural resilience it may have. And it's very important for breeders to make strategic decisions. They want to know what the outcome may be. Now, the goal of most breeders would be to produce a plant that is stable in its traits of importance, but has a relatively high level of genome-wide heterozygosity. So it's stable where it counts, but otherwise it's really resilient and vigorous and has the genetic tools to defend itself out there in the world.
And what would you say that would make it the most sustainable and vigorous in that sense?
Sorry, what would
make the plant that most vigorous and sustainable?
Well, there's so much to be discovered in cannabis genomics, but for example, this announcement that's forthcoming, which I wasn't able to say much about, is about a genetic variant in a plant which happens to be effective when in a heterozygous state. So it's a dominant allele, you could say. It works no matter whether it's just got one copy or two, and it essentially confers immunity to a disease. So if you had a plant that was homozygous for a state which did not contain that particular genetic variant, then unfortunately, it wouldn't have that. But in this one location that we've detected, if you've got even a copy from one parent that's got a certain genetic variant, then that confers really high. The paper says complete immunity to this very common prevalent disease of cannabis in the populations tested. At least you have to test every cannabis seedling in the world to make sure that transferred to every part of the population. But so far, the test has come up saying that this confers complete immunity. So that's an example. So there are an unknown number of discoveries yet to be made. I mean, every trait has a genetic basis, essentially. So that's what makes cannabis genomics so incredibly fascinating, because we can conduct what's known as it's an association study, where if we test enough plants. Say we went out into your field, tested all the plants and took careful notes about their characteristics, and we said, well, you know what, every 10th plant is beautiful, has a beautiful purple bouquet. or we could then make notes which of these samples had the the purple coloration, and then look at the genome and find genetic variants that were associated with that occurrence. And you can associate just about any type of data and look for these associations. So our genotyping,
yeah, and it's so true, because when you did the original testing on my farm, and we look at the area that has the natural irrigation versus the man-made irrigation, all of those plants, whether it's the same genetic, the same seed that's planted, are yielding a different outcome. And when you explained that to me, by the way, thank you, because you were very good at explaining that to me. And another farmer said the exact same thing. Their crops, it's exactly the same. So and I know that you are so fascinated with this. What was the first thought and point of inception where you were like, I need to know about gene mapping on cannabis. I need to know about this.
I think it was, I kind of trace it back to this moment. I was on a float plane coming across from Vancouver to Salt Spring Island, where I live.
This is already the most fun story.
Yeah, and I was up there in the air looking down, and I thought, like, what can I do? And going back, I've got twin boys and a little girl, and I had this family on a farm, and I saw the cannabis industry legalizing. This was the spring of 2017. Cannabis the legal industry was rolling out, and approaching full recreational legalization. And I'd been involved in breeding for now several years, and I was always, sharing seeds throughout the medical community, and I would do so with, like, the folklore, all the information I knew about the ancestry and the history of the varieties that I was breeding and passing on. And there was once that I had seen on an LP that was servicing medical patients. I'd seen what appeared to be the variety. It had the same name as what I'd bred, and it had the paraphrased story that I delivered out. And I don't know what circuitous route it took to go from me to that company, but I could see this paraphrased story and it was just my best guess. It was the information that I'd kind of inherited with it and passed along. So I was up there in this float plane, and I thought, there's got to be a solution. There's a problem here, because medical patients are basically buying prescription medicine based on folklore, and the culture and the names and the folklore has a really important role. Storytelling is so important in our culture, but each plant also has a story of its own. And it hit me that we could unlock that story, and we could let the plants tell their own tale and sort of announce their own identity, and that was the route to take. That we had to just do some gene sequencing and read that story, and then introduce that into the conversation.
That that needs to be written down, truly, factually. And I can relate to that, because that's kind of how I got back into, and you are absolutely, like I said, much of what you speak is Chinese to me, but I'm here to learn. And I think that you are really incredible about making your message learnable to other people, and you make it easy to listen, and you know what I mean? You speak what you do, and that's really, really important. My next question, and I always ask my guests, talk dirty to me, tell me about your soil.
Okay.
It's my favorite thing. I'm obsessed with my soil. I need to know, because I do think that that's going to make a huge difference in, like I said, Here We Grow is a global integration segment. We need to learn how our soil will react differently with different genetics and all that. So tell me.
Sure. It's funny, because I realize now that your last question, I was going to link it back into my kids, because part of that was I wanted to move from having my hands in the soil all the time, which I loved, but I felt like I'd gained enough experience doing that I wanted to take the next step and create a business that was had a farther reach and made a bigger impact on the cannabis community, both for my own inspiration and for the good of my family. Because when you're raising a family, you want to be
your focus, of course. Yeah.
So anyways, that was where this driving inspiration came from. But and at the time, I had just been working on actually that same summer of 2017 on a project to do with cannabis soils. I was working with a soil admixture. So this isn't, I mean, my soil here is very thin. I brought it in. I was growing indoors for years in peat and coir, and then moving that back out into my what's now a tomato garden and a greenhouse. So building up the soil, mixing in compost, really trying to replenish it, because we're on a slope and we have very little soil, and the soil that we do have is often quite acidic coniferous forest soil. So I built it up. But one of the things that I was using to build it up that summer was zeolite, and zeolite is it's here's a good word, clinoptilolite. It's this, it's the mineral, and it's a volcanic mineral. So magma comes out of a volcano, and if it sits underwater for a few million years, it takes on this, I think, is a hexagonal structure. So it's a beautiful honeycomb structure to the and the really fascinating thing is it holds this negative charge, so you can powder it up, add it to your soil. And so the tests we were doing, we were mixing it in at 5%, 10%, and 15 or 20% enrichment into pots of cannabis, into coco coir, and we were then taking soil samples, root core samples, just boring in and taking samples from the core, analyzing those. We were taking leaf samples, analyzing those, doing chemical analysis at the lab. We were taking liquid runoff from the pots. We were kind of and then of course at the end we were taking the flowers and measuring the cannabinoids and everything else. And what we were finding is that when we used zeolite, it was supposedly due to this negative charge, it was kind of pushing the nutrients into the plant more effectively and causing more measurable uptake of nutrients, more, especially potassium did really well, phosphorus did well, less of it leached out of the pots and more was taken up into the plant.
Sorry to interrupt you. What are you guys looking at magnesium?
I don't specifically remember what the measurements were for magnesium. I'm remembering how much the potassium and phosphorus jumped out.
And it was like significantly better though, yes?
Yes. And they call it potassium, supposedly is a really critical, it plays a critical role for, not just cell strength, but for quality, overall cannabinoid quality as well. But there was a linear increase in the production of cannabinoids, like correlated to up to about 15% zeolite, and then it started to flatline. And I thought that was hugely significant. I said, okay, there's this mineral that you can mix with your soil, and we mixed it with really depleted, like kind of just composted coco coir that had been sitting in a pile, but did not have a lot going on. And I thought, if this mineral it can have this massive impact, this noticeable impact, you'd think it would, the cannabis community would be all over it. We spoke about it, made a bit of noise, but I think that I haven't really seen it I haven't really seen it the adoption I expected. Everybody's got their secret sauce, right? Nobody likes people that have to change it. So
yeah. But you haven't, so there's been no outreach on that. It's just you're out there doing your thing. And also I know that my promo, it shows like Vancouver, British Columbia. But I don't think that people understand the beautiful, like beautiful off Vancouver Island that you live. So
I look across at Vancouver, so I can see the Lions, which are two mountains for bluffs with snow all over them right now. I can see grouse and cypress and the North Shore Mountains, but there's the Salish Sea between Vancouver and where we sit on Salt Spring Island. And so if I walk out of my office, which is built on these posts, I built it. It's a 14 by 12 foot office. It's surrounded by a deck. It's built with wood from the land. And, I walk out on the deck, I see our ducks in the pond below. And the ducks are uphill from the greenhouse. So we actually take, so getting back to soil, we take their pond water and filter it down and feed the cannabis plants in the greenhouse. And
So
in the outdoor,
incredible.
yeah, and you know, I really think
Farm to table irrigation.
yeah, it's great. Yeah, and duck manure is one of those manures which, in a liquid form, you know, they poop in the pond, and it's bioavailable and ready to use. Like, you know, just give them a couple hours in the pond, and you've got great nutrients.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you just need to admit to everybody that one of the ducks is named Danyka.
One of the ones.
Really, that's incredible. And it's about using all of your, you know, like really farming and understanding. I was offended when I was called a farmer 3 years ago, and now I'm offended for being offended. It is incredible what we can do with our land and what all of that looks like. And now, like you said, integrating cannabis,
yeah,
and what that looks like. And now you're adding a whole new element with, you know, like cannabis authentication, as you said. And I think that you're going to grow that hugely as we all continue to grow. But I always joke that I'm doing a part 2, but I really am doing a part 2 with each guest because there's just too much to discuss. And what you're doing with Lighthouse Genomics is just incredible. And there's just still so much to learn from you.
You know, we're gonna the company and those of us doing the work are always learning, and we're gonna have more stories to tell in the years ahead. We're actually gonna get into psychedelic genomics.
I'm hearing a lot about that. I will be honest, I'm out of my depth on that one, so I'm very eager to learn. I know that Kim is probably going to kick us off in a moment, but I really do, because I'm going to post this. I still have the footage. Really quickly before I let you go, I need you to let everybody know about you biking around the world.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I mean, I didn't have my gray streaks back then.
We're so good.
Essentially, I was fired up in about 2002 or 3. Got it in my head that I could head north from Vancouver on a bicycle, and a few years later would come back to Vancouver from the south. And that's the way it went. But there was a whole lot of hardships and adversity in between. You know, so it wasn't just cycling; it was moving around the planet by human power. There were elements of rowing on the Bering Sea and in the North Atlantic. There was walking with frozen feet across the tundra and the ice of Chukotka, which is eastern Russia. There was being slammed around at sea off of the Canary Islands and the coast of Morocco, and coming ashore, you know, bleeding from every, you know, from my hands and my feet from being in this rowboat, and finding the wonderful hashish of Morocco is a fabulous medicine when you're in a lot of pain. There was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean with a group of Swedes and landing in Venezuela, finding my way, clawing my way through the challenges of South America to the Darien Gap, ending up, you know, rafting down a river with malaria on a balsa wood raft, and then, you know, meeting up with my younger brother and cycling north. You know, picking my way north again, because I did have malaria. It took a little while. I visited a few hospitals, but eventually, essentially ended up in northern Mexico and took part in a medicinal ceremony involving peyote, which somehow cleansed my system and enabled me to get back on the saddle and ride all the way home.
That is such an intense synopsis to leave everybody with. But I do believe, Kim, are you backstage? Have we gone over our time? Usually she pops in and tells me to be quiet.
Well, yeah, she can like reach in with the cane and pull us off anytime. But yeah, I want to say that was 893 days, so 2.5 years, and it was really formative in my life. But I came back to Canada. I felt like, Rip Van Winkle, kind of waking up and looking around, and everything was a bit different, but the same. But one thing that had happened is that, all of my friends had careers started and were rolling along, and I had this massive culture shock and really not much going on. So I went to South America and found my way for another year and a half on the back of a motorcycle, this time a 200cc motorbike. And again, it was only after that I came back in 2009 and got into cannabis research and R&D, developing varieties, strains, and that led gradually to Lighthouse Genomics. Anyways, it's been a total blessing to be on this show with you, Danyka. It's such a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, it has been a pleasure. And hold on one second. We have we have so many people coming in.
Hi. We were just waiting backstage for you to finish up.
Thank you. You guys are the best. No, it has been an absolute pleasure. And it's funny, I feel like we all just read the 5th edition of the Harry Potter book, where it's like a serious cliffhanger. You've done some incredible things. So I definitely would hope that you would join us for a part 2 and talk more about that and how that influenced. We have a lot of questions that came in, and Kim mentioned, this is the time to ask Jim questions. I'm sure that you will get more following up. Thank you so much for joining us. And it has been a genuine pleasure. I've learned so much. I hope everybody else did as well.
If anyone would like to reach out directly, they can just contact us through the website, lighthousegenomics.com.
I have the website on the banner. They all have it. And any contact is there. Pardon me? Did you just say no? I don't.
That's okay. Thank you. It's been so great. So great. I look forward to the next time.
Bye, lovely.
Bye-bye.